All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. I am so pleased to be here today with this expert group of FCC advisors. Going down the line, I am joined by Flynn, Rico-Johnson, Policy Advisor for Wireless, Space, and International for Commissioner Starks. Next, we have Erin Boone, Chief of Staff and Wireless Advisor for Commissioner Simington. In the middle, we have Jonathan Campbell, Legal Advisor for Wireless, International, and Space for Chairwoman Rosenworcel. Next to him, we have Edyael Casaperalta, the Legal Advisor for Wireless, Public Safety, and Consumer Protection for Commissioner Gomez. And bookending me is Greg Watson, who's the Chief of Staff for Commissioner Carr. Please welcome them to the stage. So thank you so much for spending your time here this afternoon with us. Your diligent work to engage with stakeholders and advise your bosses on critical wireless issues has a significant impact on the wireless industry and consumers. We are very happy to be the beneficiaries of your good counsel today as we talk about spectrum priorities, efforts to close the digital divide, and the impact of some recent Supreme Court decisions. Why don't we go ahead and start the conversation with a topic that's top of mind for everyone here at the conference, and that's spectrum. We'll cover Spectrum Auction Authority, which we just heard about from Commissioner Starks, the National Spectrum Strategy, and mid-band priorities. Yesterday, we heard quite a bit about an important milestone, and that's that this summer, we marked 30 years since the FCC conducted its first spectrum auction. Jonathan, I'm going to turn to you first. Could you share your thoughts on the success of spectrum auctions over the past 30 years and the role that auctions have played in benefiting consumers and for U.S. wireless leadership?
Sure, thank you for the question, and thank you, Amy, and to the CTIA team for having me out here. I also just want to take a moment and just say how much I appreciate all the time and talent with all the 10th floor advisors that I work with, all the folks up here on the stage. I think Arpan's in the audience, and Edyael and other folks who are back in DC. Is a fantastic crew. We have great discussions, and I really appreciate all the input and feedback that you've given me during my time with the Chairwoman's office. So I think one of the interesting things about Auction Authority is, like, if you walk around the floor here at the show and all the spectrum policy that we've talked about, all the neat things that we're doing with 5G and everything that's coming with 6G, all of it has a thread that goes straight back to Spectrum Auction Authority. So we're a world leader in this. We've conducted hundreds of auctions, issued thousands of licenses, and raised hundreds of billions of dollars for the Treasury and for a bunch of other public interest priorities over the years. And we've established ourselves as the gold standard across the world. I used to be the chief of the auctions division. I've seen it firsthand. I've also spent a lot of time in that capacity talking to our international counterparts who come to us to get feedback on how they can start their auction program, how they can tackle some of the same challenging issues via auctions that we have done in the past, and to collaborate with us on what the future might hold. And so throughout that process and working with some of the great staff at the FCC who've been working on auctions for 30 years, you come to see that auctions have been a series of decisive moments. 30 years ago, Congress, bipartisanship, reached the decision that beauty contests and lotteries were just leading to inefficient spectrum use and was holding us back, and they got rid of it. About 14 years ago, the National Broadband Plan came up with the idea, actually going even further back with some academic papers, of like a two-sided auction. We can incentivize an inefficient use and inefficient users to give up their spectrum rights or compress and in exchange for a more efficient and higher value use. And that led to the broadcast incentive auction and a second incentive auction down the road. There's been numerous other innovations that we have come up with here in the United States that we don't talk about a ton. Like, those are some of the big ones, but some of them are like clock auctions, super quick and much more efficient way of conducting auctions, easier for folks to get involved in auctions. I mentioned that we actually have conducted 2 incentive auctions, and there's also a handful of other things. For example, when we've repurposed federal spectrum, we've integrated engineers much more into the process so that we can come up with efficient ways to figure out, hey, this part of the spectrum band's a little bit different. We need to set expectations a little bit differently. So each one of these, it reflects thoughtful and frankly bipartisan agreement to move forward with sound auction policy. And so March of last year arrived, and we're at another moment. And it's, I think, a point for another decision. And so one of the things that I keep reflecting on is over the course of this week, we've heard great ideas. We've heard, what about this band? What can we do about this? There's been talk about new incentive auction ideas, et cetera. Well, without auction authority, they will remain just that. They're going to remain ideas. And so I think that there's consensus here. My hope is that it carries back to Washington, D.C. But if there's one fine point that I can put on it, we need to do what we can to establish a long-term auction authority. Having worked directly on these programs over a long period of time, I can say with some certainty that we don't always know what comes next. Ideas come flowing in all the time. Something that led to a really innovative, for example, the second incentive auction was something that was back of the envelope once that we were able to devote time and resources to because we had auction authority. Going one off on authority for this auction or this authority for this auction is not a way to foster innovation. So I urge folks to give thought to that idea, and I appreciate all the support we've heard over the course of this conference to restore auction authority. I have high hopes.
I'm glad to hear you have high hopes. Thanks for that answer, helping us connect the dots and look ahead to the future. Greg, I'd like to turn to you next to continue the conversation. CTIA released its annual survey last month that showed the largest ever year-over-year increase in wireless data and an 89% increase since 2021. How does that growth in demand for wireless services impact your thinking about auction authority and the need for more spectrum?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think it's a great question. Before I dive in, I have got to address what happened at this conference last year, which was I was roasted mercilessly after not wearing socks on this panel. So there's this general sort of idea, like, if you're a staffer, advisor, right, you come on this panel and everyone says, oh, I just try not to break news. Well, people roasted me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. It went far and wide. I will have you know, still not wearing socks, and I'm back.
I thought about putting some on.
Look, there's no question that we have got to get back to freeing up spectrum. The data point that you're raising is something like 89% wireless data traffic growth over the last couple of years. I could probably rattle off other reports and estimates, projections that I've seen over the coming years of how that's going to continue to explode. And when you look at that and then you take a step back and then sort of look at the hard truth of last year we had no new 5G spectrum coming online. The same is going to be true for, again, this year. It's a complete 180 from what we saw under the previous administration where we got to work. It was an all-of-the-above approach strategy, over 6,000 megahertz of licensed spectrum for 5G and other licensed purposes, and thousands more megahertz for unlicensed. At the time, it was sort of funny looking back now that some folks would say that we were not doing enough to free up spectrum and promote 5G then. But those efforts of freeing up all that spectrum is really what's allowing the continued growth of this traffic to allow networks to continue to maintain and operate well. What we're going to have to see is more sort of bold and immediate action when it comes to freeing up spectrum, and we're all in to try to make that happen.
I'm glad to hear it. Bold and immediate action, not necessarily the bold socks. Right. So Flynn, why don't I turn to you next for your perspective as someone who has been involved in spectrum conversations, not just at the FCC, but on the Hill. So how do you think policymakers are thinking about the importance of 5G, auction authority, and the need to identify more spectrum?
Well, first, thanks to Amy for the invite, everyone at CTIA. It's been a pleasure. I'm the newest member at the 10th floor among these advisors, and I don't mean to be too corny, but Jonathan, I have to say, everyone here, like you say, has been so grateful in helping me find my sea legs. So thanks to all my colleagues. I didn't realize, this is why I didn't know my socks were an act of cowardice. So you're right. I've been fortunate enough to work on these issues in Congress for a couple members and here on the Hill. And I think there has been a positive change in that members of Congress are starting to understand that we cannot look at 5G and 6G as simply economic issues. They are deeply rooted in how we should understand national security in a long-term, durable way. And I think about a lot of my work on the CHIPS Act. My former boss was one of 4 members who joined a bipartisan group to try and reestablish what we had lost in the semiconductor industry. In the 1990s, we had about 40% of the manufacturing capacity before the CHIPS Act passed. It had fallen down to around 10%. And we were legislating from a place of profound weakness. The national security apparatus was involved because they saw this isn't just an economic threat to the United States, it's a national security threat. And people are starting to understand that we cannot think of these issues just as economic issues. We need to understand them within the context of our long-term national security. That's positive progress, but it hasn't reached all corners of the federal government. So we have a lot of work ahead of us collectively to continue to talk about what this means for serving new consumers, for supporting new jobs, creating the innovation we want in the US. But being the vanguard of technological innovation isn't just good for our economy, it's an important part of global leadership and how we secure a really robust national security. So that's changing, it's positive, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I think continuing to work with all the respective committees and commissioners' offices here in explaining these ideas, not just as good for jobs, good for the economy, but a foundational part of how we're going to secure our future.
Thanks for emphasizing the security aspects. That's important. Now, Erin, let's think globally for a minute. We've seen the global focus on mid-band spectrum for 5G services, and we know that we have a deficit of mid-band spectrum here in the United States. How do you think about the role of spectrum from an economic competitiveness perspective?
Thanks, as everyone else said, for having me. I'm glad to be here today. And as my boss noted in his keynote, and I wonder who helped him with that. I thought it was really... No, in all seriousness, I agree with him that the U.S. is at risk of falling behind competitively. And I agree that we're in a very difficult position with regard to mid-band spectrum, particularly. As the commissioner stated, the U.S. is sort of at a critical juncture with regaining and maintaining its leadership and driving future international spectrum decisions. And I think, it's at serious risk of marooning itself sort of on a spectrum and technology island, particularly with sort of the 3 gigahertz band, 6 gigahertz band. We've sort of moved in a direction that's increasingly diverging from the harmonization in the rest of the world. And this is going to, unfortunately, at least in the short term, have a direct and negative impact on some of the economies and scale for equipment and devices and providers and consumers. So.
Thank you. Well, we're glad you're here to help us with that challenge, and your boss as well. All right, Edyael, Commissioner Gomez led the initial preparations for the 2023 World Radio Communication Conference and traveled to Dubai to help lead it. How do you think about the importance of U.S. leadership in wireless?
Well, as everyone said, thank you for having us. And it's a pleasure to be in this conversation with my colleagues. They're all brilliant, and I learn a lot from them every day. And yes, Commissioner Gomez, as you all know, was our delegate representing our nation in these incredibly important conversations. When I think about U.S. leadership and wireless innovation, I think that they go hand in glove. We are and have long been leaders in wireless innovation globally. As we noted it, we have a rich history of spectrum auction, of auctions, of being recognized globally as leaders in that, helping other nations develop their own auction programs. And part of our work there is making sure that we're participating successfully in international conversations, right? So big picture of why the efforts at the WRC are important is that international spectrum harmonization leads to economies of scale that drive down cost and that foster innovation. And we also want to avoid fracturing global allocations because of the negative impacts that would bring. And so what do, right? We do the things that my boss was doing in her previous role and that she continues to do in partnership and on behalf of the FCC when she travels to international forums. We get ready early, right? We know that WRC 27 is several years away, but the conversations are already happening. CTIA just happened at the end of September in Mexico, and so we know that the staff at the FCC are hard at work preparing for those international conversations. But preparing early also means identifying what success looks like and planning for that. And we all can agree that in order to get to success, it will be imperative that we reach consensus. And see what I did there? I said we all can agree on that, right? Because we know that consensus domestically bolsters our success internationally. And so to get to consensus, we need to continue that engagement and that collaboration with federal agencies, with partners, with stakeholders, with the industry, and with regional and global allies to make sure that we are achieving that success. And it's also important that we commit resources to this planning to success early. That means in terms of making sure that we have the experience and sufficient staff representing us at these conversations, because making sure that we have a strong show of staff participating in this will give us a competitive edge, and it will position us for success in this international fora.
Thank you so much. That preparation is certainly key, and I know that folks are already having those conversations, so thank you for highlighting that. Well, let's talk about another milestone that has been mentioned throughout this conference, and that's that we're coming up on the anniversary of the administration's release of the National Spectrum Strategy. In the spring, the chairwoman announced that she established a spectrum steering team to lead the agency's implementation. So Jonathan, could you talk about some of the FCC's priorities for the strategy and progress on the band studies?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll try to keep it short because I really leaned in on auction authority because I felt seen at that moment.
You're supported.
Thank you. So we established the spectrum steering team to really help the commission rise to meet this particular moment, and that is that we're really focused on developing and implementing forward-looking spectrum strategy, but also an important component of that is to continue the work that the Commission has been doing for years and continues to do on moving forward spectrum policy within our own purview. And so the spectrum strategy team, I think, was very much a response to, we looked at the national spectrum strategy, its ambition, its breadth, and we realized that it was something that the Commission is familiar with, deep dives on spectrum policy, but we needed to get organized and get focused because, the band studies, there's a ton of different use cases in those bands. There's a ton of different users that are interested in those bands. We have satellite links, we have fixed, we have mobile. And so we really needed to reach across the entire agency, bring in the economists, the engineers, the attorneys, everybody who has experience working on these issues in the past and really bring it to bear on the National Spectrum Strategy. It's been a busy summer. We've made a lot of progress on the studies that we are co-leads on, which include 37 gigahertz, 18 gigahertz, and the upcoming 5 gigahertz study. 5 gigahertz is a great example of, it's one of the studies that's upcoming, but there was an opportunity there to get access to that band for UAS use right at the outset and kind of set up an interim step to push innovation along and allow folks to continue to use that spectrum as we think about a broader national framework. So we are thrilled, and I appreciate my colleagues' support on that, to get that over the finish line in August. And we sought comment on some ideas for 18 gigahertz and inter-satellite links, as well as 37 gigahertz. And so, minds are spinning and pen is on paper on those reports. And so it was a successful summer. Of course, we have a big role to play in the other two studies. We have a dedicated team that's participating in those, attending the multi-stakeholder working groups, and keeping us apprised of the progress there. And so we're very focused and very tuned in, and I think we're going to see a lot of progress here in the short term.
That's great to hear. You are definitely seen, but that's a reminder to also thank all the staff that's hard at work as well, behind the scenes, but you are seen as well.
Absolutely.
I think you leaned in there too.
Now, Greg, Commissioner Carr has been vocal in calling for a nationwide spectrum plan and timeline for several years. Could you describe his vision for a spectrum roadmap and how that has evolved or grown in importance over time?
Yeah, look, freeing up spectrum is hard work. It takes time, years in some cases, right? So what does that mean? It means you've got to have a good plan in place. It means you've got to be executing. You've got to be, doing the nitty-gritty hard work. And part of that is something he spoke about yesterday, which is the accumulation of this political capital, so that when it's come time to use it in order to deliver a win on freeing up spectrum, you're in a position to do so. As you mentioned, Commissioner Carr has put out his plan back in March of 2021. Had a number of different bands and specific timelines that we would like to have seen action on those. There were some actions that we've taken since then, and those have been all good. I think there's a constant need to continue to evaluate, look at new bands that may be coming online, continue to work through lower 3, looking at 7, 8. And beyond in order to really close this gap that we see now in terms of the license mid-band deficit.
Well, you've teed it up just perfectly for the next set of questions that I was hoping to ask you all, and that's more on that critical mid-band spectrum that's essential to supporting wireless services, innovation, and network expansion. Now, Jonathan, the Chairwoman has long discussed the benefits of mid-band spectrum and led the successful auction of the 3.45 gigahertz band. So what are some of the priorities when it comes to getting this additional mid-band spectrum into the marketplace?
Sure. So I think the Chairwoman from her early days, even as a commissioner, had shined a spotlight on the importance of mid-band spectrum. And that was one of her, as you mentioned, one of her first priorities when she became Chairwoman, and reflected in the 3.45 gigahertz auction, 2.5 gigahertz. And, I don't think that, I don't think she's slowing down on that. I think she was one of the first folks to come out and really wanted to take a look at the 7 to 16 gigahertz range as being a sweet spot for 6G, and she has called on us to do that. And we've seen that discussed at the World Radio Conference, and it's part of that spectrum is also incorporated into the National Spectrum Strategy. And she's also opened up proceedings on 12 gigahertz and how we can repurpose part of that band for mobile use. Of course, I think her dedication of resources and expertise to the National Spectrum Strategy also speaks volumes about her investment in mid-band spectrum as well. But we're also not resting on our laurels. We launched a rulemaking to take a good look at CBRS and how we can improve it. And so I think that there's room not only to look for more spectrum for the pipeline, but also how can we improve the uses of the spectrum that we've already put out there, particularly some of those innovative frameworks that we've established. And so again, I'll circle back to, I think that we are invested in doing some of this creative thinking, but again, we're a little hindered by auction authority, and so I'll just double tap that again. Yeah.
Can't be said enough.
Nope.
So Flynn, the National Spectrum Strategy identifies the lower 3 and 7 gigahertz bands, and the international community is studying the 7 and 4 gigahertz bands. What do you see as the best opportunity for policymakers in the U.S. to help close that deficit?
Yeah, well, the spectrum strategy, Jonathan described it correctly, as ambitious, and we need to live up to that ambition. On the lower 3 gigahertz band, my former boss, Ranking Member Matsui, sent a letter with then Chair Lada, urging all federal partners to explore every option on the table for lower 3. That includes repacking, retuning, relocation. And that's not to predetermine the outcome of any of these studies, but in order to live up to the ambition of this plan, which is a really successful document, we need to keep all options on the table. And we shouldn't be preemptively limiting ourselves in terms of the amount of spectrum we're studying, the outputs or potential use cases for that spectrum. And so ensuring that all federal partners are really working to live up to the full ambition and scope of that study is going to be really important. These studies need to happen, though, because we've seen what happens when federal partners feel that their voices weren't heard. We want these licenses to be investment grade, and federal users and the private sector deserve the certainty they need to invest. And so if we don't do the front end work that is just a substrate of this entire document, I think we jeopardize some of the value of these licenses in terms of stability and, again, their status as investment grade tools. So Commissioner Starks is engaged, he's committed, and I know the Hill is watching closely.
Appreciate that. Erin, with much of the rest of the world deploying 5G in the 6 gigahertz band, does that raise the stakes for consideration of the 7, 8, and 4 gigahertz bands?
Yeah, it definitely does raise the stakes. And as Commissioner Simington noted in his keynote, and I agree, that there's a unique opportunity, particularly in the 7 and 8 gigahertz bands, to drive IMT allocation and 5G adoption on the global scale. And this is because, and I'm preaching to the choir here because this is CTIA has written numerous pieces on this, but you've been arguing for some time that the adjacency of those two bands to the 6 gigahertz band in particular sort of allows for easier harmonization, even though we don't actually have it in the US. And because if you have that IMT 5G deployment in many other countries in 6 gigahertz, as it's looking like it's increasingly going to be the case, despite the fact that the FCC has deployed unlicensed Wi-Fi, we can, the adjacency will still allow for this scale in devices and equipment across countries. So I think that I agree that with you guys that 7 and 8 is hugely integral. And even though I also agree that even though it's largely occupied by federal users, that it's still underutilized, and that it makes them suitable for reallocation.
Well, there is certainly plenty more to do in the spectrum space, but I would also like to turn to the substantial efforts underway across federal agencies and by industry to close the digital divide. Edyael, why don't I come back to you? Because Commissioner Gomez recently expressed concern about a decision by the Fifth Circuit that called into question the constitutionality of the FCC's universal service funding. Could you talk more about the continued importance of universal service to help achieve internet for all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, universal service is another example, a beacon of policy that the United States, created and that other countries emulate. At its core, it's a policy that demonstrates that when nations invest in their infrastructure, they invest in their people and they invest in their future. And the Universal Service Funds does precisely that. So when you think about it, the USF helps bring internet access to schools and libraries, to healthcare facilities, and to low-income households. So it's about schools, hospitals, and people. And we also, understand that the USF recognizes that in order to connect schools, hospitals, and people, particularly in the hardest to reach areas, we will need to provide support to the providers that are trying to reach them, right? And so the high cost mechanism is designed to provide that support to help those providers serve the hard to reach areas. So there's no way that we can really achieve internet for all if we accept that there are market forces that will simply leave some schools and some hospitals and some people behind, especially in the hard-to-reach areas, as I've said, and that it will leave them on the wrong side of the digital divide, right? So the Universal Service Fund is our answer to make sure that that all people in the U.S., no matter where they live or no matter who their family is, are able to have access to affordable connectivity. And so as you said, yes, my boss was very disappointed in the decision of the in the Fifth Circuit's ruling regarding the Universal Service Fund, and she supports all avenues for review of this decision. I know that we have received a stay of the decision, and that the Commission has filed a petition for writ at the Supreme Court, which means that the stay will stay during the duration of that appeal. And I know that my boss is very happy to see that that hasn't affected the work of the Commission. You know, we continue to make sure that we are supporting schools, students, healthcare providers, low-income consumers, and service providers that serve high-cost areas, and she remains committed to the fund. And I just also want to highlight, you know, the Universal Service Fund is a great policy. It's something that we should all feel immense pride in, right? It's our nation's response to when communities or people are in difficult situations, and we step up to meet those challenges.
Could not have said it any better. The way you captured it, investing in people and the future, it's not just dollars, it's people that we're talking about here. So thank you for highlighting that. And talking about the work hasn't stopped, Jonathan, wanted to turn to you next. The Commission's recent 5G fund order is another important milestone in the effort to ensure that mobile broadband is available to all Americans where they live, work, and travel. Can you talk more about this key priority?
Sure. So I think it's a key priority for us for about 14 million reasons, and those are the homes and businesses that currently do not have wireless coverage, and that doesn't even include the countless road miles that connect all those places. And so as the Chairwoman has said, that every day that goes by in these communities without service, they fall further behind from modern economic life, and I think you captured it perfectly. I mean, why that is a huge priority. And so the 14 million is also significant in another way, because we know that there are 14 million unconnected homes right now because of the broadband data collection and the broadband maps that we've put out there. And that was very much a priority for the Chairwoman, to make sure that we're making highly efficient use of our limited resources and universal service to target this funding, and to wait on more detailed maps. And we've developed them, and we continue to refine them. And so with a few iterations of those maps under the belt, that, you know, the time is right to move forward with the 5G fund. And one of the things that I wanted to underscore is, and give a pitch for something that's coming up with the FCC, is those maps rely on feedback from the general public and other providers to continue to refine them. And so as we move forward with these next steps with the 5G fund, I want to give a pitch, again, to everybody to engage in the challenge process, to help us do the due diligence on that. There was, on one of the panels yesterday, there was this great question about what's your favorite app, and all the FCC crew was in the back going, speed test app, speed test app. I ran a speed test here. It's like 135 down, so I won't say who the provider is, but good on you. This is not gonna be an eligible area, but we're relying on you. We have a webinar coming up at the end of the month, so that we can help folks who are going to be engaged in that challenge process. We're going to have office hours, so that as questions come up and folks are filing bulk challenges, you can get in touch with our broadband data team to get answers to your questions, because this is valuable data, and we really, really want it to come in.
Of course, there's an app for that.
There's an app for that.
Well, hopefully when you took the speed test, you were outdoors doing it.
I was indoors, so that's it. And not on Wi-Fi, so again, kudos.
That's
All
great.
right. Now, Greg, with the 5G fund and BEAD soon to intensify broadband deployment, that burst of activity could bring renewed attention to siting, and that includes the timelines, the fees, coordination. Since Commissioner Carr has been such a leading voice on infrastructure policy, talked about it some in his keynote yesterday, could you expand on ways to continue to facilitate deployment?
Yeah, look, when it comes to connecting all Americans, speed matters, right? It's about getting the job done, connecting Americans, whether it be, you know, no matter the connection or wireless, wired, it does, you know, let's get people connected. I think speed is a major priority here. You mentioned the BEAD program. I don't know if anyone is keeping track of the daily tracker, but I believe we're now up to 1,059 days since the BEAD program has been stood up. 0 people connected, 0 shovels worth of dirt have been turned through that initiative thus far. We're now seeing reports that it could be many states not starting construction projects until sometime in 2026. And so that 1,059 days today could end up being, well over 1,400 for many states to start these construction projects. So what does that mean? As you noted, we expect that there will continue to be permitting challenges, delays. I think back, and I think this is a great example, but there's a bipartisan letter between Senator Barrasso and Senator Lujan a couple of years ago that pointed out a couple of examples of how federal permitting is taking upwards of 18 to 36 months, in some cases for BLM permits, and around that same time for Forest Service permits. And that's notwithstanding the good work that Congress did years ago with the Mobile Now Act, a 270-day shot clock to process and approve or reject these permits. And so I think there's certainly more that needs to be done on the permitting side. Commissioner Carr has talked about whether or not the FCC could stand up sort of a federal lands desk, sort of like a help desk to help folks navigate the permitting process. There was a recent good victory out of the Ninth Circuit, which upheld many of the 2020 reforms from the FCC's wireless siting reforms from a few years ago. So certainly I think challenges remain on the permitting side. All of those will continue to lead to delays in getting folks connected. And so yeah, we've got to continue to address those.
Absolutely. We need to make sure that we've got timely deployment. As we were talking about, there are still millions that are unconnected, and we need to get to them as soon as possible. So that's deployment. Why don't we talk a little bit about adoption, affordability. Flynn, Commissioner Starks, has been a strong supporter of the Affordable Connectivity Program, which helped connect over 23 million households. Now that the program has lapsed, can you talk more about how he's thinking about connectivity for low-income families and students?
Yeah, well, equity and connectivity has been and will continue to be a cornerstone of the Commissioner's work. He was a really vocal supporter early on. He championed a Your Home, Your Internet initiative and has made this one of his pillars of his work on the Commission. Just on Monday, we were in Portland, Oregon, and Commissioner Starks visited Home Forward, which was a Your Home, Your Internet grantee. And what they told us was that there is a huge amount of hurt, confusion, and lack of trust in federal support for their broadband, and that's understandable. These are some of the hardest to reach communities, and many of them feel that they have been sold a bill of goods. And so we have a huge amount of work ahead of us to earn their trust. That means culturally appropriate messengers who can help us talk about, if and when we refund this program, the value of signing up, because it was heart-wrenching. We heard really, really awful stories about families who found out one day that the internet that they had been promised was gone. And that's a failing, and it's an unacceptable one. So we have a huge amount of work, I think in the same thread of the Your Home, Your Internet work that Commissioner Starks led on, to make sure we have culturally appropriate messengers. We're meeting people where they are. If they're seniors who need help signing up in person, that we're providing it, that we're offering information in multiple languages, that we're sending home flyers, that we're doing ads online. We have so much work ahead of us to regain the trust that's been lost. But before we get there, we need to refund the program. And he is making his case every day on the Hill, and to anyone who will listen, that this is a program with value that we need to reinstate as quickly as possible.
Thanks so much for that hard work. Yeah. Edyael, I'd like to come back to you on a topic of technology neutrality. The FCC has reported that fixed wireless access has created broadband choice for 23% of rural households and has closed the digital divide for 3 million households. As the government looks to stretch broadband funding to reach as many communities as possible, can you talk about how proven technologies like fixed wireless could be part of the solution?
Yeah, I mean, the task of closing the digital divide and serving every community and every household in our country, in our vast country, it's a big one, right? This is an effort that needs all hands on deck. And so all solutions should be considered and on the table, and they're part really of the reality for us and part of the tools that we can utilize to make sure that we are closing the digital divide. So fixed wireless access is an option. and can be a solution for some places. In fact, Commissioner Gomez recently visited a fixed wireless site in Utah and Alaska, and she even got to visit a family in Salt Lake City and talk to them. They were actually in their living room. They were very kind to let them in and sat with them, and they said that they really liked their service. So she got a chance to see how this is an option for some people. So I think it can be part of the solution.
Thank you so much. We like to say it takes a village to connect a village. All right. Well, why don't we shift to another hot topic these days, and that's the fact that the Supreme Court recently issued a pair of rulings that have been widely interpreted as establishing new restrictions on government agencies like the FCC. First, we've got Loper-Bright, which rolled back the deference that courts will afford federal agencies in considering their statutory authority to adopt new regulations, while Jarkissi said that certain regulatory enforcement actions should be adjudicated by the courts rather than the agencies themselves. Jonathan, I'll turn to you first. How do these rulings affect decision-making at the Commission?
Well, to echo something that Commissioner Carr said yesterday, it affects our decision-making because we argue about how to pronounce Jarkissi all the time. I say it, I've heard it 3 different ways, and this is no different. So first, before and after Loper-Bright, the Commission has been very clear that the Communication Act assigns the Commission authority to regulate all interstate and foreign communications. We implement this statutory authority through our legislative rulemakings and notice and comment consistent with the APA. And at each turn, the staff is incredibly diligent in making sure that all regulations have firm grounding in law and clear legal foundation. So with each new rule and decision that we adopt, we are confident that they're on firm legal ground and that they will withstand judicial review consistent with Loper-Bright, as well as a handful of other precedent. As far as we're going to just go with Jarkissi. We don't read Jarkissi as invalidating our ability to impose monetary penalties on wrongdoers for a couple of reasons. So one is the FCC's forfeiture authority doesn't deprive defendants of their 7th Amendment rights because under Section 504, defendant cannot be required to pay a penalty without a trial de novo in federal court. And secondly, public rights exception, I'm getting a little wonky here and I apologize, but a public rights exception applies. In Jarkissi applies. The FCC cases involve public rights and their adjudication can be assigned to administrative agency. So I would say that there's strong foundation in just about all the analysis that we do on our decision making, and that remains the same, and I feel confident about the decisions that we continue to make.
Now, Erin, Commissioner Simington has focused on the significance of the Jarkissi decision on the enforcement process. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, you say Jarkissi, I say Jarkissi.
I probably have it wrong.
Tomato.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my boss feels very strongly that the FCC needs to carefully consider whether and how the opinion affects the FCC's enforcement authority and processes going forward, specifically with regard to the assessment of forfeitures. And this has led to some recent dissents on enforcement items, but I think it's looking like we're going to get some clarity in a lot of these matters given the ongoing litigation. So hopefully we will know a lot more soon, and so more to come, I'm sure.
All right. Well, we're almost at the end of our time, and so I'd like to do a little bit of a speed round. I will not ask you about your favorite app, since you are advisors. As you're thinking about all of these important issues, there are many more we haven't discussed that come before you every day as you're talking to stakeholders and your bosses. Can you tell me what is one underappreciated issue that we should all be focused on? And I'll just go down the line. So you're first, Flynn.
Sure. I'll try and keep it quick. For those of you who heard the commissioner's keynote, he's really excited about the way networks are becoming more intelligent, what that means for consumers, the environment, and operators themselves.
Thank you.
Well, I think that whenever my boss gets a free moment, he's going to talk about the FCC Cyber Trust Mark program. So he's definitely very laser focused on that, and yeah.
So I want to take advantage of the perfect timing because hearing aid compatibility is on the meeting this month. It is a huge priority for the chairwoman. She's very excited about it. I'm personally very excited about it because it is something that will have ramifications for my family. And I just want to thank the CTIA for its leadership over the years. It's been a long road, and we're very excited to reach this milestone.
Mm-hmm. If I can take a little bit more than just 10 seconds. There's so many great issues that we want to highlight, and this one is not underappreciated, but I think it's really important and timely, and that is our recent decision to make sure that emergency alerts are available, wireless emergency alerts are available in various languages. And so I want to highlight this, especially in light of Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton that is set to hit Florida soon. So first of all, I know Commissioner Gomez and our entire staff are our thoughts are with the communities that are in the path of Milton. But I'm from the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, which is an area right on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And we have had our fair share of hurricanes of varying categories. My hometown area is also predominantly Latino, and so there are many families that speak Spanish only at home. And so, the decision that the commission did to make sure that we are making multilingual alerts available is something that will directly impact the millions of people that live in the Rio Grande Valley that rely on that information being available to them in a language that they can understand in order to be able to prepare. As you know, hurricanes are going to be intensifying in strength. Milton is supposed to be, I think, one of the strongest hurricanes that Florida has seen in over a century. And so it's something that I know my boss really cares about, to make sure that consumers have the information they need in the language that they understand to stay safe, and that hits close to home. So I just want to say thank you to the staff at the FCC that made that decision possible, and also to the industry that are working with us to make sure about how we can go ahead and implement that decision. So.
Yeah, really, I think the question that's on everyone's mind here is how do we actually pronounce Jarksy? Is it Jarkesi? Does the audience have a view? No? Okay.
We could do a poll.
We could do a poll. No, more spectrum, more infrastructure. That's the tried and true playbook. I know the question was about, what haven't we touched? We touched on this a lot. But that's the playbook. We think that's what, the FCC, the administration, would like to see them get back to that, to continue to make progress to connecting all Americans.
Thank you so much for the conversation today. Why don't we give everyone another round of applause for their thoughts?